WMPG thrives with support from listeners and from Maine Solar Solutions. Maine Solar Solutions, helping empower homeowners and businesses with solar electric solutions for 10 years. Information at mainsolarsolutions.com. You are listening to WMPG 90.9 Gorham, Portland, Southern Maine Community Radio from USM. Live from the Orion Cygnus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, this is Scientifically Speaking, a weekly half-hour program devoted to elegant curiosities. And I am one of your hosts, Sarah Chang, and joining me, as always, is Bernie Rhyme, DJ Star Watcher. How are you, Bernie?
Yes, hi, Sarah. Very good, thank you.
Bernie's our professor of the astronomy lab here at USM, and you just finished finals, or you are.
I'm grading papers and projects this week, yeah.
And Bernie is also our local protector of the night skies. Reach out to us at WMPG Scientifically Speaking at gmail.com or on Twitter at WMPG SciSpeak, and you can head over to WMPG.org to find the last 5 weeks of archives of all of your favorite shows, including this one. Bernie, could you let our listeners know what is up in the night sky for this coming week?
Yes, certainly. So this will be Friday, December 16th. We're actually in the studio live, but it's a couple days early. So we're a couple days out of sync. But this is actually Friday, December 16th. So it'll be last quarter moon exactly at 3:57 this morning. That means it's going to rise around midnight. So the sky will be nice and dark before then because the days are so short. So the days are still getting shorter. We're just less than a week to the winter solstice.
I was going to say less than a week.
Less than a week. Yeah, I know. I don't mind the short days, but I know a lot of people who do. So
I do.
Yeah. Oh, you do too? Okay, yeah. Because then they start getting longer, of course. That's one good thing about that point. They get longer right away. So we're going to be down to under 8 hours and 55 minutes. So right now the sunrise is 7:08 and sets at 4:05. And, okay, let me see. What else? Okay, so you still got 3 planets in the evening sky. So you got Saturn. It's a little fainter, but it's still up there. We're going to lose it within a few weeks. Then you have Jupiter still nice and bright, and then you have Mars now up well before sunset. So I saw all 3 planets the other day from the ocean. It was kind of nice. Actually, I was looking for Venus because Venus and Mercury are supposed to show up in the evening sky right after sunset.
Ooh.
And they'll be up with a nice little crescent moon on Christmas Eve.
Oh.
So you got, I couldn't see it. Maybe it was still in the twilight or it wasn't quite bright enough. But so all the planets will become evening planets. That's pretty neat. Now it was cloudy for the Geminids, but there's another meteor shower coming up, the Ursids, in a few days. So you can look for those on the 23rd.
Does that come from
Ursa Major? Yep. And then actually you do have the actual time for winter will be 4:48 p.m. on Wednesday the 21st. So we got a few days for winter to start. And so that's pretty much it for the week. Well, we did see last time we had done the show before the occultation of the moon, of Mars by the moon happened. So it turned out it wasn't quite clear, but I saw it just afterwards. Yeah. And some of my friends saw it and got some good pictures of it.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Nice. I mean, does it look special in any way?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was like right next to it. It was completely covered up by the moon.
So you just see it kind of disappear behind.
You could see it disappear, and it took like a few seconds. I didn't see that part because it was so cloudy. And then it came back out, and you could see it come back out. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the time, it was just close.
Yeah. That's fun.
Yeah.
Neat. Awesome. Well, thank you, Bernie. And you can, if you didn't take notes fast enough, you can also check out the monthly What's Up column in the Portland Press Herald. So, welcome to another episode of Scientifically Speaking here on WMPG. And we have a resident book lover. I mean, I love books, but Bernie, you certainly read much more than I do on a regular basis. And you are often reading books that are very relevant for the show. I'm reading very random things that have nothing to do with Scientifically Speaking. And actually, the book that we wanted to talk about today is literally Scientifically Speaking. And it's looking at a lot of things in our life and a lot of the challenges that we face in our life from a scientific, logical, rational, objective perspective.
Yeah. So it's Neil deGrasse Tyson's latest book called Starry Messenger. Of course, he named that after Galileo's book, Sidereus Nuncius in Latin, published in 1610. So then he makes the comparison to that. Like back then Galileo had some cosmic perspectives, and now, of course, in the last 400 years, we learned quite a bit more about science and space telescopes and everything. So now he applies it not just to science, but to a lot of different. He has 10 different chapters, and he broke it down to address a lot of the problems we have nowadays in a more scientific way with a bigger perspective, which is something I always try to emphasize for my students. So I thought that would be perfect too.
Yeah. And so as Bernie mentioned, Starry Messenger, Cosmic Perspectives on
Civilization. That's the subtitle. Yep.
And this came out in November or so? November,
I think October.
November. And so we both kind of read a little bit of this. Bernie read much more, I think. I read about half of it. But I really like the approach that he took. And so when you read this book, I think overall he divides this book up into various topics, kind of broader topics, but he speaks about some of the conflicts or some of the challenges that we are facing in kind of more of a modern days. He does talk about some history, but he really does look at all of this from a cosmic perspective of like, hey, like if we keep this in mind, if we keep this as the goal of our communication of like what we want to get out of this, then maybe we wouldn't be in this situation or have this kind of tension that we have now.
Yeah.
So
right.
do you
Crazy
have,
theories wouldn't take root and all that type of thing.
Yeah.
So what Neil, like the first part of the preface here says, he thinks this book is like a wake-up call to civilization, because that's kind of what we need now, basically. And then he has, let me see, so it's a trove of insights informed by the universe and brought to you by the methods and tools of science.
Yeah.
So Neil always tries to approach things really scientifically in anything. Yeah. So maybe this was just a summary of a lot of things he's done on his show. I try to watch a lot of the Star Talk episodes. He comes up with a new one like every day.
Yep.
He might take weekends off, I don't know.
Yep.
So he's talked about the book then, and so it kind of made it interesting that I really wanted to get the book.
Yeah. I think, and I'll just jump in with a couple of examples that I recalled when I read the book. But he talked about this time when he was either at some kind of conference or what, but meeting with Russian cosmonauts. I think it was some kind of astronomy related conference, and he talked about this conference as being so. It was just people who loved science coming together to just be excited about science. And he kind of looks back on this experience of how is it that we think of Russians and we have this negative image or negative bias or prejudice against this whole group of people. Obviously now it's a little bit different with the political issues going on right now. But he really looks at that and he starts to dive into like, how do we bring rational thought into discussions and disagreements and come out of things with some more levity and some more just general kind of just better perspective on things, rather than coming out and saying, oh, they are monsters and just labeling people that way. And he talks about labels actually in the book, where it's a really dangerous hole to fall into when you're just, I'm just dismissing this group because of that. And so he brings his perspective to that quite a bit. What was something that struck you, or what did you really like about maybe some of the first parts of the book?
Well, he quotes some of the things from like Edgar Mitchell, who went to the moon. Looking back on Earth, I'll just read some of it. You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. So he would like to show this to the view of the politicians, and if they had ever been to space, they would see that so much clearer and better. That's one of the neat things, to be able to see things from space. Yeah. And then so even before he starts the chapters, he does have a little part, a preface called "Science and Society," and I'll just read it. He calls it Overture, which I like the music. relation to it. So I'll read some of the last part of what he says of that. So after thinking deeply about how a scientist views the world, about what Earth looks like from space, and about the magnitude of cosmic age and of infinite space, all terrestrial thoughts change. Your brain recalibrates life's priorities and reassesses the actions one might take in response. No outlook on culture, society, or civilization remains untouched. In that state of mind, the world looks different. You are transported. You experience life through the lens of a cosmic perspective. So that kind of sets the stage for the other chapters. So that's a really good way to start it.
I think one of the things he talks about, and I think a lot of people, Byrne, for example, our former, co-host, it talks a lot about that moment of the pale blue dot, and talks about that, and also I think it was the first image of Earthrise, essentially.
Oh yeah, right.
And
from the moon, yeah,
and how both of those kind of images, he described those as a way of like bringing people to this point of realizing, oh, Earth is not just my, 40 acres or my little town.
Yeah.
Earth is this whole thing that we need to protect. And so he talks a lot about how, I don't know if he's making causation, but he is correlating that with, and then he'll list all of these kind of organizations that are all about helping people and all about like outreach and supporting those in need that then followed after that those.
Well, not only a lot of interesting laws were made too, and then the first Earth Day started in 1970.
Oh yeah.
So the laws were the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. I think the EPA was started. All kinds of things that we're now doing. I mean, actually, they're weakening them in some places. So it's kind of a shame.
Yeah,
but they were all started in 1970.
Right, and he gives credit to actually our very own Rachel Carson.
Yep.
With who died of cancer, but her discovery was related to DDT, DHT.
Oh yeah, DDT.
DDT.
And then weakening the eggshells of the eagles and falcons and everything. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was big too. Okay, so let me see. Oh, another thing too that he didn't mention specifically. He did mention the Earth from space, where, like, if it's the different lines. If it's greener, you tend to have more affluent societies, and if it's browner, like a desert, like Arab, Israelis and Palestinians and so on. So that's kind of. But then what he didn't say here, but other astronauts that have been up there did say. So the only border that really matters is that thin blue line of our atmosphere that separates us from space. That's the only border that really matters. Yeah. So it's not like we don't have any borders, but we don't have any man-made borders because that's a natural
border.
Borders
are man-made, yep.
Yeah, so that's a natural border. And then he added the thing with the deserts. I mean, obviously that's also nature on the Earth, and that depends how we work with each other to be fair to everyone and not do that type of discrimination. But the real border that matters is the thin blue line, and that's what we should be working with.
Yep. And I know we're not a politics show, but he actually did talk a lot about politics. Did you find any of that to be particularly interesting?
Yeah, it just
kind of like the tribalism that we were seeing, especially now, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, that's common in a lot of those things.
I think one thing that I found really interesting was he talked a little bit about. And so this is him kind of injecting some of the objectivity and reasoning side of things where, nowadays we see the Democratic Party as kind of the progressive party and the liberal or if you will, the good party from that perspective, and that the Republicans are this
they believe
monstrous.
Conspiracies
right.
and stuff. A small percentage of them do.
Right. And and what he mentioned was that he identified like Condoleezza Rice. He identified Clarence Thomas.
Yeah, the judge.
So some of these really high level Black Americans who held high level positions in government, those were all either like kind of nominated or appointed by Republican presidents. And he talks a lot about that dichotomy of like, even our own like Democratic presidents didn't do such a thing. And so like, what is good, what is bad? We just focus on like kind of the objective part and don't focus too much on kind of all the hysteria of, and then becoming more and more tribalistic, because that's really dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll go through the chapters and a little really brief summary of that in the table of contents, and then we'll have some other quotes and things I want to read. So it's basically just 10 chapters. So the first one is called Truth and Beauty. So aesthetics in life and in the cosmos. So some of that we covered a little bit. And chapter 2 is exploration and discovery. So the value of both when shaping civilization. Obviously, we know a lot more than when Galileo first wrote his Starry Messenger. And in chapter 3, Earth and Moon, Cosmic Perspectives. Of course, that's perfect now with the Orion capsule safely touched back down in the Pacific. I was doing something that day, but I watched a rerun of the live feed of it just a few hours later. So it was really neat to see that coming down with the 11 parachutes. And next time the humans are going up in 2024. So that's just all the things we're doing now. It's just 66 years after the Wright brothers flew their first little heavier-than aircraft in 1903. We went all the way to the moon. So that's a good one. And then chapter 4 is what you were talking about, conflict resolution, the tribal forces within all of us. And chapter 5 is risk and reward. So this is interesting just for the math and probabilities. So calculations we make daily with our own lives and the lives of others. That's a big motivation factor for anything, really. And in chapter 6, this is kind of interesting, meatarian and vegetarians. So
I
never
did
thought
like
of
that. I did like that that chapter, because he talked about how like or vegan or vegetarian, like there's that missing link of it's not so much about local, but it was about what is better for the environment, and he described kind of the domestic meat industry as being highly efficient. Actually, I'm terrible at remembering numbers, as Bernie knows, but he mentioned that 1 million chickens are turned over a day for slaughter, for eating.
I thought it was closer to like 9 million.
He said it was 1 million a day.
Oh, 1 million a day.
A million a day.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. And so he was saying like kind of all of the logistics, the supply chain for meat is incredibly efficient. Whereas I can't remember the point he was making with the vegetarians, but anyway, it was like
yeah, so that could be a little more controversial than some of the other stuff. So chapter 7 is gender and identity. People are more the same than different. So that's certainly true with the things now going on in Congress and all with that to make things more even. Then chapter 8, color and race. So once again, people are more the same than different. That's a little summary of that chapter. And in chapter 9 is law and order, the foundation of civilization, whether we like it or not. Trying to be more science-based. And then his last chapter is body and mind. Human physiology may be overrated. Then he compares like an alien coming to Earth and seeing things and not seeing the differences in color, but seeing just like the limbs and the head, and they would not even think that it would be totally different what they would see. Yeah, so those are the 10 chapters.
I also really liked in his book, he described a couple of times actually where he had made a tweet about a specific topic. I think one of the topics that he had talked about was something related to the vaccines. I can't remember what the content of the tweet was, but there was a lot of outcry, a lot of backlash, a lot of I think it had something to do with, go get vaccinated. Like, here's the data. It's good or whatever. And there are a lot of people were like, I'm not going to get it because it's against blah, blah, blah. And just a lot of pushback from his followers. And so he ended up removing the tweet, replaced it with this interview that he had done with a vaccine expert. And I think that's how, you're always saying we have one show a week, whereas Neil does a show every day. But I think he probably gets a lot of his ideas from crowdsourcing from
he does
followers.
Tweet all the time, and of course we're not as well known and we don't get ideas. We have to come up with stuff. Fortunately, I read a few things and we try to get a few guests occasionally.
But no, I appreciate that he recognized when maybe sometimes his communication didn't miss the mark, his communication missed the mark with his audience. And so he would go back and correct it. I don't necessarily think he should have taken the tweet down unless it was misleading in some way. But I do think that it was nice to see him kind of talk about these things in such a humble fashion and just say like, oh, like, and this is how I remedied it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that's good. I like it when people... And a good scientist would do that because they want to be proven wrong because then they learn something about what to get right. They're not stuck on one thing their entire careers, you know. I mean, that's like Edison, when he made so many mistakes before he got the right light bulb. And, of course, now we're way beyond that method of using of light bulbs and things. Okay, so here's a quote from the second chapter called Exploration and Discovery, the Value of Both When Shaping Civilization. So he quoted T.S. Eliot. And this is one of my favorite quotes from him anyway, so it really fits in well here. Okay, so we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So then he summarizes, that's as close an analog to the cosmic perspective as has ever been penned by a poet.
Yeah.
So that's a really great way to see it. So in other words, almost in a sense, we really don't have to go anywhere. We developed the things like to build a space telescope, and then we know more about space because we've never been anywhere physically other than the moon.
Yeah.
But look how much more we know now than Galileo knew when he came up with the first Starry Messenger. Yeah.
Bernie, since you are like the embodiment of, I think, what the embodiment of kind of inspiring students to be curious about the world around them. How do you define what a cosmic perspective means? Like, what does that mean to you?
Oh, yeah, just basic, of course, cosmic, just maybe a bigger overview. I mean, another big thing is all the astronauts, and over 500 people have now been to space. It's called the overview effect. So you get that effect. You can maybe get it if you only go up for 4 minutes, like a few people, but you certainly get it if you spend 2 weeks in the space station, or if you go to the moon. Of course, it's even more of an overview. So that's one of the most important things, because then you'll see that all the boundaries are man-made, and every topic, like this is a little different tack because of this book. He takes on pretty much every topic, color and race and conflict and resolution, to see that in a more cosmic way. So that's what the students, I know they're not going to become astronomers or physicists, so I want them to take that perspective into whatever they'll do. And I have a lot of business majors, athletes, art majors, drama students, so they can take all that, musicians, into their work and see that in a more cosmic, just from a larger overview or whatever type thing. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So I have another quote here from, this would be chapter Earth and Moon, and this is actually by an astronaut who I met personally. That's kind of neat. I've probably met at least half a dozen astronauts in person.
So wait, is this like Inception? You're looking, you're
right.
It's quotes of people that Neil has quoted.
Yeah, quotes of, right. But some also have a resonance with me because I met some of these people, and that type of thing. So this is an astronaut named Mike Massimino. So he was an engineer on the shuttle missions that were fixing the Hubble Space Telescope when it was in trouble, like in the mid-'90s. And actually, it was kind of neat because I saw him at a conference at UNH where I saw some other interesting people like David Sabel and Alex Filipenko and those people. That conference is run by someone who started our astronomy club, John Gianforti, who's now a teacher at UNH. So I try to go to that conference. He doesn't have it every year. So he was the first astronaut I ever met. And then we'll just talk to him after his official presentation, because it's not a huge conference like Stellafane. There were only a few hundred people there, not a few thousand. So Mike Massimino is his name. Okay, so he wrote a memoir. A lot of these astronauts, of course, write books, and that's great. I should be reading some more of them. Okay, so this is the quote. "The thought that went through my mind when I spacewalked and looked down on Earth was that this must be the view from heaven. Then it was replaced by another thought. No, this is what heaven must look like." So it's almost like you're not just looking down from that view, but Earth is kind of part of that if you have a bigger cosmic perspective.
Yeah.
Because as I said, only 500 out of our 8 billion people have ever been to space, but it doesn't mean any one of us can't have that perspective, and that's what this book helps to do on everything, not just on scientific things.
Yeah. All of this is really about we're in the thick of it all the time. How do you take yourself out and just look at it from a little bit further away? Just a little bit. It's like what artists do. When they're painting, they're so close, and then they got to step back about 10 feet and be like, it doesn't look that bad, actually.
Yeah, and I just took an outdoor plein air watercolor class this summer, which is different because I'd done watercolor before, but outdoor things change so quickly, and it was harder to really get in tune with the things and how nature works. You just see it totally differently. If you take a picture, yeah, of course you need some, basic rules and rules of composition and the technical things, but that's it. But when you're out there and seeing them, there's so much more information, and you got to capture that in some other way than just taking a photograph.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, you got to withdraw from and music too. I mean, you work on the details, but then you want to convey something with that music.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is there anything that you took away from the book that you might want to bring back to your students?
Well, I offered it. I try to list a few books and other things that they can do, and I give them some things for like star maps for next year to keep them interested. And of course, the eclipse coming up, everyone's gonna want to see that. But and of course, I'll bring it up to my students next semester too. Probably just kind of what we're talking about, the importance of that perspective on a lot of basic things that everyone has to deal with, like color and race and law and order. He talks about an entire country, an entire different civilization that he would like to set up for Earth.
Oh, yeah.
So he doesn't have all the borders.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that was really neat because he got that idea at the science conference in 2016 that I wanted to go to. But the ticket, instead of cellophane, was like $50. The ticket here was like $800. And it's called Star and Music together.
Oh.
And they don't even have it every year. They've had a few since. And that one was held in the Canary Islands in Spain, where the biggest telescope in the world is. So it's a great location. And people were there like Brian Cox, the English particle physicist, who was a professional musician. He has a lot of different programs and neat things. Jill Tarter, who does SETI research. Then Richard Dawkins, evolutionary biologist. Jim Al-Khalili, he's a theoretical physicist, I think from England. He has a lot of great shows on YouTube. And Carolyn Porco, who ran the Saturn Cassini missions. I met her twice in person. I have autographed pictures. I've talked to her in person. So, and then, of course, Brian May.
I was going to ask, Brian May?
Oh, yeah, he was there. He has a
nice.
PhD in astrophysics, and we were... Yeah.
I told you I tweeted at him.
We were trying to get him on the show.
Trying to get him on the show.
Yeah. But so all those people were there. So then Neil was there, and he was talking to a guy named Taylor Millsall. I mean, I haven't heard of him. And then so he came up with this virtual country in some sense that would kind of unite, and it's called it Rationalia, just because rational land, kind of a summary of that. And so there would be no citizenship tests, no immigration, no pledges of loyalty. That's the part of the big problem we have here. I mean, the different organized religions, everyone thinks they're right. You have to be a citizen. You have to be a patriot.
Right.
Well, none of that would make any sense because in some sense we're basically all the same. And then he has a few other things like arts and things that would be and how that would work with the legal system. And then that type of thing. So that was
is the idea that is he suggesting that all of these different groups create opportunities to segregate and build like this hierarchy?
Well, I mean, that might be a natural thing from the humans would do, but it wouldn't start that way. It's just I know he does have some things where an alien comes to Earth and doesn't see all those differences, color and race and all the other things. And then, so that was certainly different. Sometimes I think what it would be like, even the things that any one of us is seeing, like cars driving or whatever else, what that might look like from an alien perspective, and any one of us can kind of do that. So, I know it probably wouldn't work because then all those things would crop up again, even if you start with a clean slate. But it would be better, and it could work eventually once we have more of a cosmic perspective and see that the only border is the thin blue line and not all the borders we made up. Then we'd really work together because we know we're out in space. The sun will blow up in a few billion years, but I guess now, of course, we just found that we can do fusion. So maybe that'll be a good energy source and help with climate change if they get that going in time. And it'll be a while before it's commercially available. Just because they did it for a split second doesn't mean it's going to be the new thing around the corner. But we are making some progress.
But do you think that in a way, it's easy for him to say this and talk about like, we just need to, have this. Perspective outside of us, beyond us, to move through life. Is it just easier for him to say this because he has such a high place in society? And
well, maybe. And the people he was discussing all this with, they're not they're pretty far up there too as far as their
They're not
influence,
your
what they can
lay
do.
people who are struggling and
Right. Even though he could have, I'm sure he did talk to a lot of people at that festival too. I mean, they weren't the ones giving the presentation. No, I think anyone can do it to some degree. I mean, Neil himself was just a regular person. He went to the Bronx Science High School, so he had a good start there. Basically, I think 7 or 8 Nobel Prize winners came from that school, then went on to different colleges. One of them did a lot of study in genetics to help solve the whole thing with the virus, COVID that we just had. He had interviewed him with Star Talk. So a lot of really famous people came from that school. So he had that, and Carl Sagan personally wanted him to go to Cornell, and he ended up going to Harvard instead. so that's good. Of course, not everyone can get in Harvard. It's like 1% acceptance rate or whatever. But still, it still doesn't mean that anyone couldn't do this.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah.
I just imagine like, oh, you're like in an argument with somebody and being like, dude, you need to just like step back and have a more cosmic perspective on it. Like, I feel like you would get punched in the face.
Well, probably, but it still doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that.
I think it is. Yeah, I think the idea is that we should practice this more in our own lives, and
and then we wouldn't be so prone to conspiracy theories. And just because you see something on, you know, some social media now with everything going on with Twitter, makes it even worse.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah.
What is one last thing you would like listeners to take away from this book?
Well, I don't know, just how practical it actually is to everything we do. Yeah, and that
it's like a life guide.
Yeah, I mean, right, not getting into the psychology or, you know, that part of it. Like, there's plenty of self-help books out there. Yeah. And this is more just to see everything more scientific.
Right.
Because that's more impersonal.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you've been listening to Scientifically Speaking here on WMPG with myself and Bernie. The book we just talked about was Starry Messenger, Cosmic Perspectives on Civilization by Neil deGrasse Tyson. And from your favorite nerds, well, stay tuned for What's in My Mind, It's Not a Phase with the fabulous Emma and Izzy. And from your favorite nerds, we'll end with the joke of the day. Where would an astronaut park his spaceship?
In orbit.
At a parking meteor.
Meteor, okay. Not the meter. To the meteor. All right.